Good afternoon. We are doing a Facebook Live discussion on the Kanzius device. Stay tuned.
Thanks for joining this week's GoErie Live discussion. Today, Erie Times News health reporter David Bruce and online reporter Sarah Grafsky will be talking about the Kanzius device and the latest updates and developments on this story. I'm Christopher Millett, and I'll be moderating your GoErie Live comments. Thanks to Gannon University for sponsoring these live discussions every week. Enjoy the conversation.
David, thanks so much for doing this today.
Oh, absolutely.
This is such a hot topic. It's one that you have covered for 12 years, we discovered, right?
At least 12 years. And before that, other reporters, including Pete Penapento, covered the Kanzius device. It's something that folks here in northwestern Pennsylvania, around the country and around the world, have followed with great interest over the years.
Right. So we are going to be answering your questions today. It seems like they are never ending. We always have a lot of interest around this topic. So please feel free to submit them, comments, suggestions, questions. David will do his best to field. We are going to be starting with just some basic information for those who might be new to the topic. What is the Kanzius device?
Sure. Many of us have been well versed in this for years and years, many of the folks watching this, but let's go back to the beginning. John Kanzius was a broadcast engineer and later the head of Jet TV, Jet Radio here in Erie. Upon his retirement, he was diagnosed with cancer. And at that time, he had started experimenting in his garages, both here in Mill Creek Township and down in Sanibel, Florida, where his winter home is at, on a device that it started off by heating hot dogs, as he liked to say, with pie plates. And that he could find that he could heat these devices through radio waves. And it led him to think, well, this might be something that could be used to treat cancer tumors. Mm-hmm. He got the attention of some of the physician leaders at MD Anderson Cancer Center outside of Houston, where he was being treated for his rare cancer. And eventually that led to experiments on the device. It led to a lot of success and years of attention, including 60 Minutes articles. Originally, what they had found was that by putting an animal in the device, injecting them with nanoparticles, which are tiny pieces of metal that could attach to cancer cells if treated properly, those devices, those little particles would be heated up and destroy tumor cells without harming the tissue around the cells. Later on, John passed away from his cancer. Later on, experiments showed that instead of using the nanoparticles, they would use the device in conjunction with chemotherapy, and it would make the chemotherapy more effective. What happened then, though, is there was a dispute between the company that owned the device, which became Therma Oncology, and the research team at Baylor University. And Therma stopped payment on their research contract. Unfortunately, what happened then was radio silence, as we said in the story. We didn't hear much about what was going on the last couple of years with the Kanzius device. That all changed about a week ago.
Yeah, tell us about this latest development, David.
So what has happened is the company Therma Oncology, which is based in Kansas, who have been very quiet about what they've been doing with the Kanzius devices, put on their website information about John Kanzius again, and then also a video about a new version of the Kanzius device. It's called the Vectrix, VECT and then capital RX, pronounced Vectrix, which is a new version of the device which can be used to treat, they say, abdominal tumors in conjunction with chemotherapy or radiation. And they've been talking with folks at UPMC in Pittsburgh about conducting the first in-human trials. So after a couple years of not hearing anything about the Kanzius device, wondering what had happened to it, it appears now we are on the verge of seeing human trials with a new version of the Kanzius device known as Vectrix, possibly at UPMC hospitals. We don't know if it'll be Hammett at the Hammett Cancer Center, which will open up next month, or down in Pittsburgh or wherever UPMC cancer centers are at. But we're being told maybe within the next 3 to 6 months. So huge news as far as the future of the Kanzius device.
That is huge. I remember we actually did one of these earlier when they were planned for, or they were hopefully speculating to do trials in Italy, right? That was the last time trials were mentioned, and it was a few years back.
They had planned. Dr. Stephen Curley, who was a lead researcher for years and years on the Kanzius device, starting at MD Anderson, and then he had transferred over to the Baylor College of the Baylor Medical School. I don't have the term right.
It's okay.
But he went to Baylor, and the research was done there until Therma stopped funding it, and some legal issues happened. What has gone on since then is apparently, and we don't know much because again, Neotherma does not return our calls when we're seeking comment from them. Apparently research has continued somewhere on this new device, the Vectrix, and that it's an exciting time for this. We're very eager to hear what will happen next with the new version of the Kanzius device.
We have a few emailed questions. I'm going to get to one because that kind of goes along with that, I guess, from a Merlene. Is there any easy way we can keep current on the status of this?
And that's been the issue the last couple of years.
Right.
When John was alive, no one promoted the Kanzius device like John did.
Yeah.
He was a broadcaster. I mean, he would call us in the newsroom and want to talk about his device. Smart gentleman who knew what to say on the record and what not to say on the record, but loved to give us updates on how the device is doing. And then we would reach out to Dr. Curley down in Houston, and he'd confirm it. He'd sometimes, you could hear on the phone him shaking his head and going, well, John shouldn't have been saying that. Lately, we haven't had that happen. Part of the problem is we've heard nothing. Neotherma does not return calls.
Right.
We heard about the update on their website. I had received a call from someone who also tracks, just a person that's interested in the Kanzius device, had left a message on my answering machine, say, hey, Neotherma updated their website and has put John back on there, and there's something that perhaps they might be doing something with this. That led to information on their website, and then as well as UPMC getting involved with this, possibly by hosting the human trials.
Mm-hmm.
So,
go ahead.
Oh, but your question was, I lost track there a little bit. Your question was
how to keep current on the status of this. So if
True.
you are at home and you're interested in this, you gave to this early on,
Yep.
How do you keep current with it?
We're going to keep current on this by talking at regular intervals with the folks at UPMC.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to try to reach out to Neotherma regularly, as I have been since they purchased the patent rights to the device. But it's really sounds like it's going to be through UPMC. So the negotiations are going to continue for human trials. I'm sure UPMC will have some sort of announcement. I was told that by David Gibbons, the head of UPMC Hammett, that they will reach out when there is an agreement done. I will keep asking them about that. That's probably how we're going to keep track of how things are going.
So I suppose your answer is subscribe to the Erie Times News because
Absolutely.
David will be answering those questions for you.
When we know, we will share.
Absolutely. And you had mentioned that these new human trials are going to start on pancreatic cancer.
According to the website, and there's a nice video. If you want to go to the Neotherma Oncology website, they have an interesting computer video of what it would look like. So for folks who have seen the prototypes of John Kanzius's devices, they are big, bulky things, and then he had put up a prototype table that someone would lay on. Well, the new device, the Vectrix, is going to be, it's actually a much smaller device, according to the video that Neotherma has on its website. They strap it around your abdomen because they're first going to go after pancreatic cancer,
right,
which is a tough cancer to treat, tough cancer to diagnose in early stages. Mm-hmm. So it's going to strap around the person's abdomen, and then they are going to be put into a standard MRI machine. And the reason for that is while the device works by sending the radio frequency waves to the tumor site, the MRI will be able to monitor the temperatures both of the tumor cells and of the healthy tissue around it.
Oh.
It's interesting, according to this video, this machine will not heat the tumor cells to a point where they die. They're going to heat them to a temperature of 107.6, which does not kill the cancer tumor cells, but would make them more receptive to doses of chemotherapy or radiation. So the theory is lower doses of chemotherapy and radiation will be effective at treating those tumor cells.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes.
We had a viewer comment or ask, could the Kanzius device provide any opportunity for addressing a specific type of cancer? He was talking about blood cancers. So
True, which is a type of cancer that John had himself. Mm-hmm. And he later did say he tried the device on himself. He had said that to me, and he had said that in one of his 60 Minutes interviews. Eventually, the way that it's been explained on the Neotherma website and talking with the folks at UPMC is the first human trial would be pancreatic cancer. Mm-hmm. Probably the next trials would be other cancers in the abdominal area, probably liver cancer, not for sure, but probably liver cancer, and then other ones that might be in the abdomen. They are cancers that are very difficult to treat, do not have the best 5-year survival rates, that are where researchers are desperately looking for new methods of treatment. But the thought is that there will be other cancers down the road. No timetable, though.
Yeah, and I know this might seem like a stupid question, but how do researchers, I don't know if you know this, how do they measure kind of success rate with that? You know, I mean, how do they, if like cancer is diminishing or if chemo is working, like how do they?
Well, usually, and I'm going to lean back more on the interviews I did back before when they were trying to approach human trials when Dr. Curley was still leading research. So stage one of any clinical trial on people is just to basically make sure that the treatment is safe and it's not causing problems.
Okay.
That's stage one. And then stage two is more of how it treats. And apparently what they would do, and I'm guessing because I don't have the knowledge on this particular trial, is that they would then judge it against traditional treatments for the same disease.
Okay.
And then see what our side effects are, what our survival rates for 1 year, survival rates for 5 years. It's going to be ongoing. But usually what they do is they compare it to traditional treatments for the same disease.
That makes sense. The other thing that this same person asked John, whatever happened to attaching metal particles to cancer cells and blasting them?
True. Those are the nanoparticles that I was talking about. And that's a lot of it focused on that for many, many years. And then during one of, I believe, Dr. Curley's visits to Erie, and I was just going back to research a little bit, and we had a story on it, I think 2015, but it may have been approached a little earlier, is that they found a different way in research. They found success not using the nanoparticles, but just blasting the field with radio wave frequencies and then making it in conjunction with chemotherapy, so they would need lower doses of chemotherapy to do it. The other reason they stopped or downplayed the use of nanoparticles is Dr. Curley said the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, was considering the nanoparticles a drug, and that the approval process by the FDA for them to get to human trials would be a lot longer if they used nanoparticles than if they didn't. But because they had success without having to use them, they then chose that path, and that apparently is the path that Therma and its researchers, whoever they may be, are using now.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
It doesn't, and I don't know, maybe this is just me talking, but doesn't it seem like it was very quick, like how this all unfolded? I remember with the Italy trials, it seemed like it was like, Curley was saying, they're coming. Why was this so quick?
Well, no one's telling us anything.
Yeah.
I mean,
I guess the answer is we don't know.
Even after John passed away, and we were, we didn't have the John's calling us a couple times a week and wanting to talk about his device. We were in constant contact with Dr. Curley. We were, especially when the Kansas Cancer Research Foundation was up and running, and they were raising money. That job that Mark Neidig, who was head of the foundation, had, he needed to raise $10 million for research. That was his job. Part of that job was making sure that the Kansas device and Kansas research was in the news, that people were talking about it. Well, if you remember, they reached their goal. That was a unique nonprofit that closed because it reached its goal. In fact, it had paid for all the research leading up to human trials at that time, and they didn't need more money.
Right.
So the foundation closed. So, we knew every step of the way what was going on. That's not the case.
Yeah.
Therma Oncology is a for-profit business. It owns the patent rights. Those patent rights originally were held by a company that John Kanzius set up himself. It's always been a for-profit company. Later, after John's death, his family sold those rights to a company called Gen X. That company was then disbanded, and the rights were taken to Therma, which do have many of the same people on that board as Gen X. There was a whole big hubbub about the person running Gen X. We've done stories on that. Go to GoErie.com. You can read all about that. But Therma is the company now that has owned it for several years. And the reason we haven't heard much about it is they haven't had much to say about it.
Right,
no.
Yes, absolutely. And that kind of, I feel like maybe that's some of the interest, is that we got so much information up front, and then people, they kind of closed the door. People are wondering.
Absolutely, what went on? And we wondered what went on.
Yeah.
It was very frustrating. I had done stories basically that said, what's happened with the Kanzius device?
Yeah.
Which was why it was a pleasant shock early last week when we found out there's something going on. And we're going to keep folks updated on this. This is something that we're going to follow to the best of our ability. We will continue to look on the website at Therma, because I feel that's the only way they're going to talk about anything that's going on. We're going to be in contact with the folks at UPMC, and we're going to keep seeing. Now, there was an interesting part of this, and those of you who read the stories that ran last week, part of this was very interesting. I mentioned Mark Neidig, who ran the Kansas Cancer Research Foundation. Well, Mark that was his job. He is a consultant. He goes from nonprofit to nonprofit, helping them raise money, and he goes on to the next one. Interestingly, Therma hired him to write a passage about John for their website. And then Mark took it upon himself, he said, to fly to Erie. Let me backtrack a second. So when the foundation raised $10 million for cancer research, there was some money left over, about $2 million, maybe a little bit less, maybe $1.5 million. That money was divided among the 3 cancer centers where human trials were promised to take place, one of them being the Regional Cancer Center here in Erie. That money was put into a fund that is overseen by the Erie Community Foundation. It has grown over the years to almost $800,000.
Wow.
The deal was that money was to go to pay for any patient-related costs for human trials on the Kanzius device. If no human trials were done within a 5-year deadline, that deadline expired July of this year, that money was to go for any other cancer research or support in Erie. I imagine there were similar deadlines for the cancer centers in Florida and in Houston, where there were also funds set up for. But we're talking about the one in Erie. So Mark Neidig, he told me on his own dime, came to Erie last July as this deadline was approaching, met with Mike Batchelor from the Erie Community Foundation, and tried to convince them. Now, Mike Batchelor says he tried to convince Mike to give Therma the money, the $800,000 for human trials. Mark, when reached, said in a text to me that no, he was trying to get them just to extend the deadline so that it would go past July. Mike, the Erie Community Foundation, denied that request. That money, therefore, is going to the McGee Women's Research Institute for costs in their opening their Erie branch of that institute, which will happen a little bit later on.
Wow, that's interesting. I did not know that.
Yep.
One more question, kind of going back to, and I think that this is from reader Steve. Is there any way of knowing if the original idea of directly killing cancer cells doesn't actually work, and so they turned it into this new direction, or whether the original idea is still being explored and this new technique is merely a development along that original path? In other words, is the idea of directly killing cancer cells still a potentially viable idea that's being tested somewhere by someone, or is it Kanzius's original idea likely dead, or is Kanzius's original idea likely dead?
So I guess the question is Therma also sponsoring research using nanoparticles?
Right.
To go directly into the tumor cells, heat up and kill them? I don't know. I don't think so. The human trials that they're promoting do not involve nanoparticles. I don't know. They may also be doing research with nanoparticles and it's not progressing as well, or maybe it is, and they'll post something on their website in a week saying, oh, we're also going to do human trials that involve the the new version of the Kanzius device, the Vectrix, and nanoparticles. But I can only go by what
we know,
what they've announced on their website and what the folks at UPMC said, and those do not involve nanoparticles. They do not involve directly killing the tumors. It involves heating the tumors, which increases the blood flow to the area, which makes the chemotherapy drugs and the radiation more effective at lower doses, which is great news for patients because we all know the side effects of chemo and of radiation, and if we can reduce those and be as effective or more effective in killing cancer, that's great news.
This is complex stuff. One thing I wanted to ask you, and again, this might be a stupid question, but say you or a loved one wants to take part in a human trial, how would you go about doing that?
Oh, sure, and this isn't just the Kanzius device. This is and many of these, and not all of these are cancer either, but let's talk about a cancer clinical trial. This is something I've talked about recently with the folks at Hammond and Vincent as they prepare to open their individual cancer centers and dissolve the regional cancer center. Cancer trials are the place where cutting-edge cancer treatments are delivered. The best way to get involved with a cancer trial is there are federal websites where you can read up on them. I think one of them is actually clinicaltrials.gov. I'll have to double check that, but your best bet is to talk to your oncologist.
Okay.
And talk to the hospital that you're getting treatment at, or the RCC for the next few weeks while the RCC is still up and running. But you talk with them, see what clinical trials that you are eligible for, and they can guide you. And because those are, regardless of what cancer you have, and sometimes for other diseases as well, that's where you can get cutting-edge treatment.
So, David, you will continue covering this. I think we've answered all of the questions we received via email. You'll continue covering this, and
it's the story that keeps on going.
Yeah.
I mean, it started 17 years ago. I had interviewed I had interviewed John about his cancer, had done a story. It all started with John went out to lunch, I think, with our former publisher, Ed Mead, told him all about this, and they said it'd be a great thing for the Times to do a story about. It all kicked off then. Mm-hmm. That was 17 years ago. Unfortunately, John has been gone about almost 10 years, but his invention lives on.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks to everyone who listened in to this week's GoErie live discussion. This video will be available for replay on the GoErie Facebook page and on the GoErie homepage. Thanks again to University for sponsoring the discussion, and to David and Sarah for explaining everything to us today. You can find upcoming topics and guests on the GoErie Facebook page each week. Thanks for listening.